Back here on Beat the Closing Number with Mo and myself, and time to bring in our guest, one of the best NFL bettors in the X betting space. It's not X-rated, it's just not Twitter betting space anymore. He is Fabian Sommer. We'll see how he grades my pronunciation there. You can follow him on Twitter at Suma. That's how most Twitter podcasts pronounce it, I think, these days. So if you want to call them out, you may as well. To start, Suma810, I should say. That's SUMMA 810. If you're not checking us out on YouTube, pro NFL bettor, also co-host of the Forward Progress podcast on the Hammer Betting Network. What's going on, Fabian? I think I'll stick with your first name, and then we'll go from there on the podcast.
Yeah, Eli Mo, thanks for having me on. Regarding the pronunciation, very good, like a 9 out of 10, I would say. Pretty good. Like, most people don't get it straight for the first time, so yes, pretty good.
Mo, do you want to give it a crack?
Sommer. And it's
very good. Very good.
Use one N.
There you go.
Very
I'm gonna give Mo like an 8.5. And I'll take the 9. I'll take the 9 out of 10 still. But like I mentioned, Fabian is Suma is one of the best pro bettors around, very well respected when it comes to the NFL betting market. And for those of you who don't know, Fabian's out in Germany. So not just your handicapping process in general, that's where I want to start before we dig into some of your favorite futures when it comes to the NFL betting market, but handicapping wise, and then also just your viewing experience is completely different than what most people experience in the States, because you're not awake for the Sunday night game, or maybe you're recording some games depending on how your sleep schedule's doing throughout the week. So why don't you break it down for our listeners here, how you go about handicapping the NFL, especially because how you watch games is definitely counters the way most Americans watch the NFL and bet on it, especially live.
Oh, yeah. So over here in Germany, or Europe, so to speak, we had the NFL Game Pass for 10 years or something. And now it was bought by DAZN. So basically we can watch every single game live, in every possible way. Next day, we can watch the 40 version. We can watch the all 22 at some point during the week. We can basically watch every live action that we want. And yeah, I mean, over in Germany, NFL Sunday starts at 7 p.m. in the evening. So I can easily watch the first and the late slate. And yeah, the night game is rough. It starts at 2:30 a.m. in the morning. I will usually start watching it, but at some point I'm just gonna crash usually and fall asleep, and then I'm going to watch or rewatch the rest of the game in the morning. And Monday, Thursday, it depends. Sometimes I stay awake. When I have a bet on the game, I tend to stay awake more often than not. And if I don't have a bet on a night game, I will just go to bed and rewatch it in the morning when I wake up.
What would you set the market on you watching and staying up for Sunday Night Football over the course of a 17-game regular season, or I guess 18 games? What would you set the market at?
So basically, are we talking about 18 times 3 primetime games?
Yeah.
18 times 3, so I would probably be in the so over under 27, 28, something like that.
Okay. I'd probably bet the over. I think I take the over there. I'll give you some credit where it's due, but we want to hit on some of your futures here as well. And before we do, how would you compare your handicapping process, or maybe just explain and expand upon your handicapping process in general when it comes to the NFL, whether it's futures, evaluating the market in general week to week? And I know you don't have any bets on week one or anything like that, but just for our listeners that aren't familiar with your handicapping style.
Yeah, so I usually don't have a huge futures portfolio. I will bet a few regular season win totals. I will bet a few maybe AFC, NFC, Super Bowl outrights. Sometimes I will bet something during the season when I like a number, when there are some decent buy low opportunities. But my bread and butter is pretty much spreads and totals. And I would say that I'm more of a subjective handicapper, so to speak. So I've been using or trying to build models, mathematical models in the past. I've done power ratings, units grades, and all that stuff. And all that is a great, or everything is a great supporting tool. But primarily, I'm just strictly focusing on the matchup on the field, so to speak. So I will do like rankings for every team, like unit grades, where I see each unit of every team's secondaries, offensive lines, quarterbacks. I will use tons of data, like whatever metric you can think of. Some metrics I'll try to build my own, and I basically try to put everything together and come up with the best possible number on each game. But it's more like a mental model than a mathematical model. So I'm basically looking at what's the matchup, anticipating injuries, looking at all the data available, and basically then formulating numbers on a game. And when I see an edge on the market, I will bet it. And it's a process that basically goes from Monday morning until Sunday afternoon. Like you can make numbers on a Monday morning, but they are subject to change throughout the week. Like when you are getting like some new data, when you find a few matchup nuances, injuries, line moves and stuff like that. So you are basically constantly throughout the week checking at everything possible and trying to get the best market entry on every game that you want to bet.
Mo, before we get into futures, I just want to throw one thing at you. When it comes in, I know you said your model, because it's more innate than computer-centric maybe, but you said factoring in different variables, or you kind of alluded to that. And I went on a podcast during college basketball season, and I more so handicapped college basketball on a day-to-day basis going back to maybe half of last season and then 5, 6, 7 years beyond that. And especially when I started to integrate my own mathematical model. And like you said, maybe not necessarily just going solely based off of that, but also using other factors. And one of them being, especially when it comes to the NFL, I'm curious in how you incorporate this into your handicapping process, rest. Because I think the perfect example was at least from a game standpoint, was in week 4 last year when the Dolphins were very banged up. Dolphin secondary was extremely banged up going into Cincinnati. That line spiked to, and again, I'm just talking surface level if you want to dive into a little bit more as you expand upon it. But that line opened, I want to say maybe Cincinnati shaded towards 2.5, or maybe it was Miami juiced at +3, spun up all the way to 4.5, I think by kick, because of all the Tua concerns. So it wasn't just the secondary. And Cincinnati covered marginally, but still covered. So I'm kind of curious going into because there are two different lines of thinking for that game. Just handicappers that maybe look from a numbers-centric model and say the Dolphins shouldn't be 4.5-point dogs. But then those that incorporate numbers into rest advantage and all those other variables and say, well, if you factor in rest and theoretical schedule advantage and maybe a spot here. I know the word spot can be perceived as a negative in the betting space, but how would you kind of, if you want to take that example or any other scheduling standpoint, I know we're not deep into the NFL season. I know you don't have any week 1 bets like I mentioned, but how do you factor in rest on a given week in general, or again, if you want to touch on that game in particular?
Yeah, so there are a lot of situations that I think about during each week, and lots of stuff you can basically look back in your database, like when you have lines and all that specific data going back to like 10 or 20 years, you can basically scrape or query like every certain situation, and depending on the sample size, you can draw some conclusions that some situations might favor certain teams, some might not. Lots of stuff I gotta say that is basically always priced into the number. So if there was an obvious situation like Miami week 4 last weekend, Cincinnati, I think in week 3 they had the game against Buffalo, and their defense was on the field for like 98 plays or something. It was a crazy heat game. So subjectively, that's hard to quantify, but subjectively, that was a defense on a short week traveling to Cincinnati that was pretty gassed. And that week, I also went back through my whole database, like 20 years, and looked at all instances where a team was, or a certain unit was on the field for like 90 plus, 85 plus plays, and how they performed in the upcoming week. And the issue is that, and it's pretty often the case with NFL, is that the sample size was pretty tiny. So there were not a lot of teams that were playing like 90 plus snaps on defense, for example, and having to travel on a short week. I think that the sample size over the past 20 years was something like 7 or 8 or something. So when you are dealing with these kind of situations, it's pretty hard to draw some quantitative conclusions. You can basically only approach that with a subjective mindset, in my opinion. But there are some situations where you have a decent sample size, where you can basically crunch all the numbers, but that's also mostly pretty much baked into the market number. For example, like I know a few seasons ago, like there was a lot of talk about teams of a bye week, and what's pretty interesting is that teams of a bye week were basically overrated for a long time, and they pretty much underperformed against the spread. But at some point that was baked into the number, so the edge was pretty much gone. And that's basically all the stuff that you have to be aware of, that you basically have to look at all the metrics, data that you have at your disposal, and just try to come up with the best possible solution to that problem. And sometimes it's a small sample size, you cannot quantify it, and sometimes you just have to take a more subjective approach to that stuff.
It's good to know there's still room for some art in this game, but I have to say that I tried to take the other side and fade all the people who loved the Bengals in that spot, and didn't work out for me. But hopping into your opinions for this coming season, one of the most, I would say honestly, hottest teams in the market has probably been the Bears. They, after an absolutely atrocious season, obviously, they're actually having a pretty decent-sized win total, and got people buzzing that they could challenge for the division. Justin Fields could win MVP. That's obviously, I think, for most people who have a clear head, one of the most insane numbers you can find in the market right now.
Yeah, you want to talk about an opinion being baked into the market already. I mean, 20-1 being priced alongside Lamar Jackson or close to it. Obviously, we'll get Suma's opinion on that, but go ahead, Mo.
Yeah, just like, sounds like you might be on the low side on the Bears. I know I definitely am. So could you tell us what you're thinking in that market?
Yeah, so I like the Bears to go under their win total. One of the win totals that I like the most at the current price, when you look at a book like BetCris, they are dealing, let me check, Chicago Bears under 7.5 wins plus 118. In my opinion, that's a great number, because we are basically talking about a true win total of 7.7, 7.75. And I mean, you just have to think about that rationally, in my opinion. Like a team like the Bears that had the number 1 overall pick and that did not do too many roster upgrades over the offseason. Yes, there were some, like a completely new linebacking corps, DJ Moore as the new wide receiver 1. But overall, it's pretty tough for me to look at their schedule and find 8+ wins. And the biggest reason for that is that Justin Fields has been or maybe not the worst, but one of the worst passing quarterbacks over the past 2 seasons and last season as well. And people or some folks in the media like to draw comparisons to Josh Allen and his third year, because Josh Allen used to be that very low profile passing quarterback. He got Stephon Diggs, and finally in his third year, also combined with his rushing ability, he somehow broke out completely. But Josh Allen was one of the biggest outliers in the past 20 years or something. And when you compare Justin Fields and Josh Allen just in their second years, there's still a wild difference. For example, just to throw out some numbers here, Justin Fields in his second season, 54.4 passing rate, minus 34.5 DVOA, dead last in the league, minus 0.13 EPA per dropback on non-scrambles, also dead last. And Josh Allen in the second season was significantly better in like every single metric. So the starting point for both quarterbacks is completely different. Like Justin Fields has to make a major leap just to be on the second year level of Josh Allen, let alone being close to his third season. And the Bears, their defense, yes, they got 2 new linebackers. They got Yannick Ngakoue, who doesn't want to stop the run at all. Secondary is not that much improved in my opinion. So we are still talking about a bottom 12 defense. The offensive line is also already dealing with an injury. Left guard Tevin Jenkins, who was pretty good last year, will start the season on IR. Rookie right tackle, second year left tackle Cody Whitehair now has to switch again from center to left guard potentially. Maybe they will start Dan Feeney, who they got via a trade early in the week. Dan Feeney has not been good at all in his career. So I mean, it will take so much for Justin Fields to just be an average passing quarterback, and even if he's an average passing quarterback, we are still looking at a bottom 12 defense, and then it will still be pretty hard, in my opinion, to win 8+ games. So Chicago Bears under 7.5, one of my favorites in the regular season win total market.
I'm right there with you. I wrote up this market multiple months ago on the lines, and basically everything you said was stuff I touched on. I loved Fields out of the draft. I don't like what I've seen from him so far. Unfortunately, I'm really rooting for him. I want him to succeed, but he hasn't been good, and I think this defense is going to be really, really bad, same as you. So I'm loving Bears under, and just to put one more stat at people, when it comes to EPA per play, and funny how we were talking about comparing them to Josh Allen, the Bears' pass defense was so bad that they essentially turned opposing passing games into the Bills last year. That's how bad they were. It's hard to overstate the jump from that bad to like competent enough to have a winning record, which is basically what they need to get close to get over here.
It's also funny,
yes,
the overreaction to a screen pass to DJ Moore and how that rate, I mean, it didn't change the betting market. And it even funnier that this is now 2 Bears quarterbacks. Granted, Mitch Trubisky's price drop was extremely sliced. Like we're talking like 100-1 to maybe 20 or something. Like it was a crazy drop going back to after the year after the Bears won the division. And then they regressed under Matt Nagy, but that's another conversation for another day. So this is now 2 quarterbacks when the Bears haven't had, and I know that's more of a historical context than anything, that the Bears haven't had a franchise quarterback really in their tiny era, I guess, since McMahon. But yeah, I'm with you guys. I am not high on Fields, especially the national media market that wants to overrate a 66-yard screen pass that gets housed in the preseason to DJ Moore. Let's see that translate into regular season success for Fields, let alone into a 20-1 MVP ticket. But anyways, I digress, Mo. I live in Chicago, Suma, so I naturally hate the Bears. I am not a Bears fan. I used to work at Chicago Sports Radio, and I have an aggressive stance against the Chicago Bears.
Like, there are some clips on Twitter where people dropped every Justin Fields dropback of that game. And, I mean, yes, it's preseason, but that looked like a college passer or something. Like, I mean, there was nothing to see there. He was dealing with some great pockets and he was missing plays left and right. I mean, if that's a sign for things to come, good luck, Bears.
Love the talent, but yeah, the processing speed just has not gotten there. And Eli, I can tell you one time I watched a Bears game and was anti-sweating them in Chicago. Not a good experience. I felt like people were giving us some very dirty looks in there. Yeah. Let's talk about one of the teams Eli likes, which is the Cowboys. I like them a little bit too, and I feel like obviously the market's like really high on the Eagles, and I am too. I think the Eagles have an awesome team. Eli's a bit higher on the Cowboys than I am, so where do you stand on them?
The Cowboys are one of my top teams going to the season. I'm pretty high on them. I think the Eagles and the Cowboys are like the top tier in the NFC, and I only have the Cowboys marginally below the Eagles. And when you look at this team, I think there's a good case to be made that the Cowboys, at least on paper, have the best defense in the league. Defensive performance is generally hard to predict. There's a lot of variance involved, but just from a talent perspective, when you look at their defensive line, when you look at their secondary, I think there's a good case to be made that they have the best defense top to bottom in the league. And on offense, with Dak Prescott over the last two seasons, this has been a top 8 offense by like almost every efficiency metric that you look at. And that was with the Cowboys giving Ezekiel Elliott like 200 plus carries each season for whatever reason. Makes zero sense, but they did it, even though Tony Pollard was like 5 times the electric player that Zeke Elliott was. Last season, Dak was basically playing with one healthy and solid receiver in the passing game. That was CeeDee Lamb. Michael Gallup was coming off that ACL tear, and he was a shell of his former self. Dalton Schultz had 2 separate, I think, PCL injuries and was playing through it. He also had like I think 3 dropped passes that turned into interceptions just last season alone. And the third right receiver on the roster was Noah Brown. And this season, yes, Jake Ferguson, we don't need to talk about him. Basically a very low floor at the tight end position, but offensive line is at least in week 1 better than last year with Tyron Smith coming back. CeeDee Lamb, now you have Brandon Cooks at your wide receiver 2, and you have Michael Gallup dropping into the wide receiver 3 spot, 1 more year removed from that ACL injury. And I think that alone is a significant upgrade over last season. I'm not as low on Mike McCarthy and Brian Schottenheimer when it comes to designing offenses and play calling. I think Mike McCarthy, when he was at Green Bay over the last couple of years, he was extremely pass heavy on early downs. Brian Schottenheimer had one season where Russell Wilson was like shredding defenses with a high pass rate on early downs. So it's not like this hasn't been there for those 2 guys. I think just the overall offense, Dak, the O-line, the receiving group is just too good to not be like at least a borderline top 10 offense. And when you think about it, borderline top 10 offense, maybe the best defense in the league on paper, that should be one of the best teams in the NFC. And what's also important to note is, in my opinion, that because they have such a projected easy path in the NFC, I think they are also a sleepy Super Bowl contender because there are not a lot of juggernauts to beat in the NFC.
Yeah, I'm with you there. We didn't necessarily talk about Cowboys Super Bowl odds. We only talked about one there, and maybe we'll get your take in a second because Mo and I are low. We agree on one team in the AFC North in terms of lower on them than the rest of the market, but Mo doesn't agree with my Super Bowl take from that division. So I do want to get your opinion. But Cowboys, I bet them to win the division at plus 195 earlier in the week. So we have the same sentiment when it comes to Dallas, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I am maybe a little bit more concerned about the offensive coordinator shift from Moore. And you make a good point about Schottenheimer still shown or has a history of being pass heavy, especially going back to his days with Russell Wilson. But just tempo and pace wise, that's my only concern, especially because McCarthy does have a history, even though he was pass heavy in Green Bay, to kind of slow things down, which kind of negates Prescott's upside, maybe helps his turnover case to regress in a positive direction. But I digress with Dallas. I'm with you overall, especially, like I said, on defense. So really quickly, before we get your long shot to win the AFC, which it stems from the division I just talked about, or at least alluded to, the AFC North. So I have a win total bet under on Cincinnati. Mo at least agrees with the notion that the Bengals may underperform the market's consensus. And with Burrow back, most of the betting market is back up to 11.5, with shaded towards the under. I think minus 140, maybe the best number you can get on Cincinnati in terms of the win total. So curious your perspective there. And before we get your long shot, also want to get your take on Ravens and Browns. So I guess your full take on the division, because I had the Ravens Super Bowl bet at 25-1. Market's definitely shifted that a little bit since mid-May, down to 18-1. Mo has a bet on the Browns to win the AFC North at plus 400. And then you have a bet on the other team. So give us your full perspective here on the division, depending on how you want to look at things.
Yeah, so first of all, I mean, everyone is talking about the AFC East to maybe be the best division in the league. But I think that the AFC North has a lot of upside in that regard as well. I mean, the interesting thing is that, like, except for the Bengals, like, all the other three teams have an interesting range of outcomes in terms of variance on the quarterback position. Ravens, yes, they have Lamar Jackson, but it's a completely new scheme, new receiving group. So new OC, new scheme, like something completely different from what they have been running over the past couple of years with under Greg Roman. So there might be some growing pains early in the season. We don't know at what level Odell Beckham is going to come back. Rashad Bateman will not be at 100% week one after his Liz Frank injury. Zay Flowers looks like the real deal, but they basically need more juice on the wide receiver position to possibly run the scheme that we are expecting from Todd Monken. I think on the season, this could be really, really good. I'm also high on the Ravens, just in terms of their upside. Yes, they could be a little bit slow to start the season, but I think as the season progresses and they get more familiar with the scheme, this could be pretty good, because I'm also high on Lamar Jackson and I fully expect him to be able to run that specific scheme. Cleveland Browns, I mean, what are we going to get from Deshaun Watson? Like, this is a super talented team. I think their defense is going to be significantly improved. Especially their defensive line, like 3 new starters. Like, over the past couple of years, they basically had Myles Garrett and then nobody else. Even Jadeveon Clowney, he was playing through injuries and was not really that Clowney that or that the Browns hoped they would get. And now we are looking at Shelby Harris, Zadarius Smith. Zadarius Smith can kick inside on passing downs with the third pass rusher, whose name I cannot remember and always forget, was coming over from the Houston Texans. So with Jim Schwartz at DC, I think this is going to be a much better defense. And then, yeah, offensively, good scheme, good play caller, great offensive line. Amari Cooper, David Njoku, Eli Moore. On paper, like, Deshaun Watson has no excuses. They are going to run a different scheme, not all this heavy look, condensed, play action heavy Brown scheme that we use from the past. We are going to see a lot more MT, a lot more 11 personnel. Basically what Deshaun Watson did well at Houston, but we don't know what Deshaun Watson we're going to get. So there's some variance there. I mean, if Watson is good, this is going to be one of the best AFC teams. But the same, I would also argue for the Steelers. And that's where my long shot AFC future lies. Like, the second year quarterback jump is very real. Like, when you look at the history of the game, when you compare numbers of rookies versus second-year quarterbacks, like the second-year jump is very, very real. It's the biggest jump in terms of efficiency, whether it's EPA per play or whatever, for quarterbacks. So the Steelers, they are going to have I would say, solid offensive line. They maybe upgraded slightly at 2 positions. They are returning all other guys. They added a rookie left tackle in the draft. Not sure whether he's going to start week 1 or not, but that offensive line, I think, is not bad and will not be a major issue. They have a very intriguing receiving group with George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, Pat Freiermuth, Donnell Washington, who is likely going to be eased into the offense, maybe on some 12 personnel looks. I was pretty down on Matt Canada, the OC last year, because I thought that the scheme was pretty vanilla. We don't know whether that was like stubbornness on Canada's part or whether they just didn't trust Kenny Pickett to run a more open offense. But going to the second year, like, everything is set up for a jump by Kenny Pickett, and I think we already saw it in the preseason. The Steelers are suddenly throwing deep. Everything looks surgical. Yes, it's the preseason. Yes, it's a sample size of 5 drives, but I also think it's very hard to fake these 5 drives when you know what I mean. So if Kenny Pickett is good, I think this is going to be a very good Steelers team with a decent defense, with one of the best defensive lines in football. And yeah, if you combine that, they might be maybe the best team in the AFC North, or at least playing for the division title if Kenny Pickett is good. So there's a decent, I think, thick tail towards the upside, condition on whether Kenny Pickett is good. You can get them at 30-1 to win the AFC, which is a number I like. I think it's a little bit too high when you think that, or when you think at just about the macro perspective on the team. And yeah, and from a football fan perspective, like, just imagine if Kenny Pickett is good, if Deshaun Watson is good, this is going to be the best division in football, and we are going to have like a lot of great divisional games.
Yeah, and again, for people that maybe want to counter that with that they're not a fan of Pickett, well, the floor is baked into the number. So again, that's kind of where, if you're looking at things from a roster construction or even a specific player, you may say, okay, I kind of sided with the floor. Well, then you're not getting a ton of value unless you maybe want to look at a win total under or something like that for Pittsburgh. But that's where looking at a number like you mentioned in Pittsburgh, where all those potential outcomes are already baked in, and that's why you're getting a 30-1 ticket on the Steelers. So makes a ton of sense for bettors that are maybe just jumping into wagering in general. Now, to wrap up, I know you're a Jets fan, Suma. So Mo and I didn't even touch on the AFC East because we don't have any futures bets in that division. But you look at week 1, Jets I think the market's jumped down Buffalo a little bit, now around 2.5. So depending on how long you want to go with it before we get you out of here, how are you looking at the Jets from a fan standpoint and also just market-wise?
So these are 2 completely different things. So from a fan perspective, like, I've started watching football, I think, in 2009, which was the first Rex Ryan season. And even though the Jets made the AFC Championship game like in back-to-back years, this is the first season in my entire football or fandom life that I might be looking at a good Jets offense. So that's already a W in my book. And when I think about the market perspective, so the Jets are second to win the AFC East at around plus 300, plus minus. I think that's very fair. I also think that they should be marketed ahead of the Dolphins, especially when you think about the length of the season, because Tua Tagovailoa has to be or has to have some more injury risk than other quarterbacks. Week 1, great game, Buffalo Bills on Monday night. At this current number, I I slightly lean towards the Bills here, just because there's still some uncertainty with the Jets. Offensive line, Mekhi Becton, right tackle, he's just coming back from two very big injuries. He hasn't played a regular season snap in 2 years. Dwayne Brown has missed almost all of training camp. 38 years old, starting at left tackle in week 1, and we can't be entirely sure that we are going to get a top 10 offense. Aaron Rodgers, 40 years old. He wasn't that great last year at Green Bay. So I'm probably expecting a quarterback efficiency that is back between last year and his last MVP season. It might be a top 10 Jets offense. It might only be a borderline top 15 offense. And when it comes to the Bills, I mean, this is arguably the best team in the league, top to bottom. And this will be one heck of an opening night for the Jets. Bills minus 2.5. I think it was a little bit lower, like a few weeks ago. Bills took a little bit more money since then. I think rightfully so. We just can't be sure what we are going to get from the Jets. We can be pretty sure what we're going to get, or we can be more sure what we can expect from the Bills. So I think that line somewhere between minus 2.5 Bills, minus 3 is probably spot on.
He is Suma. You can follow him at that name, Suma810 on Twitter, Pro NFL Bettor, co-host, like I mentioned, at the Hammer Network, Betting Network, Forward Progress podcast with one of the best in the business as well, Rob Pizzola. So definitely want to check out his work. Definitely want to maybe tail some of his bets. Very, very well respected gambler when it comes to the NFL betting market. Thanks so much for joining us on our first futures edition of Beat the Closing Number, man. Really appreciate it.
Eli Moore, thanks for coming on, and I wish you a lot of success and a good start into the season.
Thank you, man. And for our listeners on YouTube, remember to hit the thumbs up button. If you're listening to us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you find your favorite podcast, remember to subscribe, ring the bell, and get notifications wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. 5-star review, all that good stuff. Thanks for watching and listening to the first ever edition of Beat the Closing Number, or at least for the 2023 NFL season, presented by TheLines.com.